El presidente de Estados Unidos ya no puede sostener el cerco informativo. Entre su crisis de salud y los vínculos que lo rodean, en el caso Epstein, la última salida ha sido desaparecerse, esta vez con un viaje de golf, e incluso esa escapatoria colapsó. Pam Bondi, que ya registraba un desempeño algo cuestionable, consiguió superarse a sí misma con un desliz que dejó al descubierto un listado secreto de asociados de Epstein, incluido en una presentación judicial del Departamento de Justicia. MSNBC lo adelantó y hoy ponemos todo en orden: conexiones, dinero y por qué esto complica todavía más la Casa Blanca. Recordatorio rápido: si les interesa este análisis, apóyenos con un me gusta, suscribiéndose y comentando. El 98% de quienes nos ven aún no están suscritos. Ayuden a crecer esta comunidad llegando a 1000 suscriptores. Sin más, hacemos con la noticia.
What happened to the lawyer who got Epstein his bizarrely lenient plea deal when he was first arrested on sex trafficking charges in Florida? What happened to the lawyer who got him that bizarrely lenient plea deal? Well, Trump hired him to be his own lawyer. What happened to the U.S. attorney who gave Jeffrey Epstein that bizarrely lenient plea deal? Trump put him in his cabinet in his first term. Well, who then prosecuted Epstein a second time when he was brought up on federal charges? That was the SDNY line prosecutor who Trump inexplicably fired last week. Who was in charge of the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Prisons when Epstein then killed himself in federal custody? President Donald Trump. Who bragged to a reporter about how much Epstein seemed to like women on the younger side? Who said Epstein was a lot of fun to be with? Who bragged that he was friends with Epstein for 15 years? Who flew on his plane at least 7 times? And who now says that everybody needs to stop talking about Jeffrey Epstein right now? Answers there are Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump, and Donald Trump.
Lo relevante no es solo la relación personal con Epstein, sino la red institucional que se activó alrededor. Abogados, fiscales y funcionarios con capacidad de definir procesos críticos. Ese entramado explica la resistencia actual a divulgar información completa.
You know what is so interesting? As I sat there and I listened, I was like, this is like a ridiculous RICO case. I mean, the levels of complexity and the levels of organizations that participated. We're talking about allegations that there were attorneys that were doing sham marriages, bringing ladies from Russia and Ukraine over. We're talking about specifically them potentially having links to foreign governments. We're talking about little girls. We're talking about this happening to little girls, but also to young college girls. We're talking about all of the people that participated. It wasn't just Maxwell, it wasn't just Epstein, but we're talking about the fact that there were drivers that were driving these girls and knew what they were doing. There were butlers, there were cooks, there were lawyers, there were accountants, all of these people that were engaged, and we don't know their names. And so there's a lot of people that are still out there that need to be held.
Ese es el punto neurálgico. Epstein y Maxwell no actuaron en el vacío. Hubo apoyo, dinero y silencios operativos. Cada nuevo documento sin tachaduras puede identificar a quienes facilitaron, encubrieron o financiaron todo este problema.
Let's go first to NBC's Yamiche Alcindor at the White House with an NBC News exclusive. There's some new information within just this last hour, Yamiche, on the Epstein investigation. So what have we learned so far, and what's going to come next?
Well, good afternoon, Alex. Just in the last hour, our colleague Tom Winter broke the news that the DOJ on Friday asked a federal judge overseeing the case of deceased sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein to deny a request from NBC News to unseal the names of 2 associates who received large payments from Epstein in 2018, court documents show. The Justice Department cited privacy concerns expressed by the 2 individuals as the reason for not making their names public. Now, the first associate received a payment of $100,000 from Epstein. The second associate received a payment of $250,000. Now, both of those payments happened in 2018, just days after the Miami Herald began publishing a series of stories where victims criticized a plea deal Epstein received in Florida in 2008. Now, as part of that plea agreement, Epstein secured a statement from federal prosecutors in Florida. The 2 people would not be prosecuted. Now, the payments became public after Epstein was indicted and arrested in New York in 2019. And just last month, NBC News sent a letter asking a federal judge to unseal the redacted names because Epstein's dead, the criminal proceedings have ended, and the DOJ said in a memo in July that there would be no additional charges filed against uncharged third parties. The judge has now given NBC News until September 12th to respond to the DOJ's request that the names remain secret. It's not known when the judge will make a final decision about NBC News' request. Now, of course, all of this comes as there's a bipartisan effort to release more files related to Jeffrey Epstein. Take a listen to lawmakers.
Less than 1% of these files have been released. We are demanding today on the discharge petition that all of the files be released. If you've looked at the pages they've released so far, they're heavily redacted. Some pages are entirely redacted. And 97% of this is already in the public domain. So I'm calling on my colleagues, be one of the next two who sponsors this discharge petition.
So, of course, Alex, it's striking to see Republicans and Democrats joining forces to push for more files. But President Trump insists that everything that could have been released has now been released, Alex.
Got to tell you, it's a hell of a story from Tom Winter. He may have opened a can of worms here, and you have very carefully and thoroughly reported this, Yamiche, in a very short period of time. Thank you so much.
Aquí les haré una traducción política, por así decirlo. El propio escrito del Departamento de Justicia reconoce transferencias cuantiosas y contemporáneas a la reapertura del escándalo. No estamos ante protección de víctimas, por supuesto debe garantizarse, y no ante un ocultamiento asociado remunerado. Esa frontera es nítida y es donde la Casa Blanca quiere bajar la cortina.
Chairman Jordan's made it clear he's not going to give us a hearing devoted exclusively to the Epstein files, but Pam Bondi is coming in soon, Kash Patel is coming in soon, and we will have the opportunity to question them. And, you know, it's not as good as having one hearing just devoted to it, but the Democrats will make sure that we get very deeply into this.
I spoke with your colleague, Congresswoman Stansbury, last night, and she said, we've all learned so much over the last couple of months. It's really expanded, at least my perception of the scope here. She said that she thinks that there could be thousands of victims. I mean, it feels like it could be a much larger cover-up than we even thought it was a few months ago. You were very deeply dug into this. What do you think?
Yeah, and Melanie's absolutely right about that, and that's why it's so excellent that the victims have come to the fore and are acting in such a brave way to both articulate their own experiences, but to talk about this systemic problem. On the Judiciary Committee side, we're going to be releasing an explosive report early next week about how the Trump administration has been systematically dismantling the anti-human trafficking and anti-domestic violence programs and grants across the federal government, human trafficking programs at the Department of State, at the Department of Justice, at Health and Human Services, USAID, you name it. And we've collected all of that, and we're going to show people that this is an administration that is on the side of the human traffickers and the sex abusers. And if you look at Donald Trump's pardons, and if you look at various actions taken by the Department of Justice, they are overwhelmingly on the side of sexual offenders and human traffickers. So this is not like one kind of lonely, discrete, one-off episode we're talking about. This is now becoming clear, a whole system that the Trump administration is committed to.
We will definitely look out for that report, and thanks for the work in compiling it. It's not a surprise that that's what they have been doing. I want to get your reaction to something Speaker Mike Johnson said yesterday when defending Trump's claim that the whole Epstein matter is a hoax. It was kind of bizarre, but take a look.
It's been misrepresented. He's not saying that what Epstein did is a hoax. It's a terrible, unspeakable evil. He believes that himself. When he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant to try to take this stuff down.
I mean, the last part of that was, I don't know, it was a little mind-blowing, but what did you make of what he said?
Well, a hoax is a corruption scandal or a crime that Donald Trump doesn't want anybody talking about anymore. It couldn't be any clearer. And I'm glad that the victims were indignant and outraged about that slur on their experience and their advocacy today. There's nothing hoax-like about this. And if it's a Democrat hoax, as he claims, he started it. because he was the one who was saying, let's go ahead and release all the files. And then after he had 1,000 FBI agents working around the clock to discover what was actually in there, that's when he decided, oh no, nothing to see here. Everybody just go home and forget about it. The public is not going to let this go. And those files have got to be released. The real question is to what extent they've already redacted or damaged information in there. But we don't need these retread files that they've been sending over the last several weeks. We need the files they're not sending. Those are the ones that we have to demand. And I'm glad that we've got 4 brave Republicans on our side and every Democrat in the House of Representatives demanding a complete accounting of this nightmarish child sex.
La reacción oficial define el problema. Si todo ya se entregó, ¿por qué blindar 2 nombres con pagos verificados? El intento de clausurar el asunto antes de una publicación íntegra multiplica las dudas y anima a más legisladores, incluso republicanos, a respaldar la petición de descarga. Entonces, ya terminando el video, vamos a abarcar todo lo que vimos. Esto se puede traducir en 4 hechos. El rastro financiero identificable de los pagos del 2018 que el Departamento de Justicia pide mantener en reserva, la admisión operativa de que hay terceros no acusados con incentivos para seguir ocultos, la atracción bipartidista para abrir archivos completos con resguardo de víctimas y por último tenemos la estrategia defensiva fallida en la Casa Blanca, la cual siempre hemos visto en este canal: negar, minimizar y cerrar en vez de establecer un plan de divulgación verificable. Un gobierno sólido no teme el escrutinio, define un procedimiento, fija salvaguardas y cumple los plazos. La insistencia en reservar nombres de asociados y no de víctimas tras monto y fechas precisas deteriora la autoridad presidencial ante el Congreso. Esto complica las relaciones con el sistema judicial y va a reforzar la percepción ciudadana de inmunidad para los élites. Si el Ejecutivo no corrige, el Congreso impondrá el ritmo y el contenido de la transparencia. Por último, si este análisis les resultó útil, suscríbanse, dejen un me gusta y compartan este video. Como dijimos al inicio, el 98% de quienes nos ven no están suscritos. Ayúdenos a crecer esta comunidad y llegar a 1000 suscriptores. Nos vemos en el próximo.
La estrategia de Donald Trump frente a los llamados archivos Epstein ha sido clara: confundir, distraer y restar credibilidad a una investigación que amenaza con exponer redes de poder comprometedoras. Pero cada intento de desviar la atención no solo fracasa, sino que lo acerca aún más al centro de la controversia. Un recordatorio rápido: si te está gustando el video, no olvides suscribirte, darle like y comentar. El 98% de las personas no está suscrita. Dicho esto, pasamos a video.
On the side of sexual offenders and human traffickers. So this is not like one kind of lonely, discrete, one-off episode we're talking about. This is now becoming clear, a whole system that the Trump administration is committed to.
We will definitely look out for that report, and thanks for the work in compiling it. It's not a surprise that that's what they have been doing. I want to get your reaction to something Speaker Mike Johnson said yesterday when defending Trump's claim that the whole Epstein matter is a hoax. It was kind of bizarre, but take a look.
It's been misrepresented. He's not saying that what Epstein did is a hoax. It's a terrible, unspeakable evil. He believes that himself. When he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant to try to take this stuff down.
I mean, the last part of that was, I don't know, it was a little mind-blowing, but what did you make of what he said?
Well, a hoax is a corruption scandal or a crime that Donald Trump doesn't want anybody talking about anymore. It couldn't be any clearer. And I'm glad that the victims were indignant and outraged about that slur on their experience and their advocacy today. There's nothing hoax-like about this. And if it's a Democrat hoax, as he claims, he started it, because he was the one who was saying, let's go ahead and release all the files. And then after he had 1,000 FBI agents working around the clock to discover what was actually in there, that's when he decided, oh no, nothing to see here. Everybody just go home and forget about it. The public is not going to let this go. And those files have got to be released. The real question is to what extent they've already redacted or damaged information in there. But we don't need these retread files that they've been sending over the last several weeks. We need the files they're not sending. Those are the ones that we have to demand. And I'm glad that we've got 4 brave Republicans on our side and every Democrat in the House of Representatives demanding a complete accounting of this nightmarish child sex ring.
La contradicción que rodea el discurso de Trump es reveladora. Algunos de sus defensores lo presentan como un supuesto informante del FBI contra Epstein. Por otro, aseguran que todo esto es un caso de invento. Ambas afirmaciones no solo se contradicen, sino que reflejan la intención de diluir responsabilidades. Lo que queda claro en evidencia es que el movimiento MAGA intenta instalar una narrativa de confusión que oculte la magnitud de los vínculos políticos y financieros detrás de este escándalo. La decisión del Departamento de Justicia de proteger la identidad de quienes recibieron pagos millonarios de Epstein en un momento clave, justo después de que la prensa revelara su historial de abusos, no es un acto de resguardo a víctimas, sino un encubrimiento institucional. El hecho de que estos pagos permanezcan sin explicación pública plantea preguntas sobre la red de poder que aún permanece intacta. Y precisamente allí es donde el nombre de Donald Trump aparece como un posible beneficiario de este muro de silencio.
I have no memory, no act of anything, of having seen anybody that resembles a child, let's call it what it is, at that house, giving him a massage. At all. Question, what, if any, photographs did you see in Epstein's house in Palm Beach? Answer, there were lots of photographs of young girls. Question, what do you remember about those photographs? Answer, I remember they were shocking. Question, were the young girls clothed or unclothed in the photographs? Answer, unclothed. Question, where did you see those photographs in Epstein's house in Palm Beach? Answer, they were in almost every room. Question, did there come a time that you were given clothing to wear when you were staying at Epstein's Palm Beach house? Answer, yes. Question, what were you given to wear? Answer, I was given a schoolgirl outfit. Question, can you please describe the schoolgirl outfit for the jury? Answer, it was a short pleated skirt, white socks, white panties, and a shirt. Question, where did you find the schoolgirl outfit? Answer, on my bed. Question, what, if anything, did Ghislaine say? Answer, I asked her what was happening with there were clothes in my room, and she said, I thought it would be fun for you to take Jeffrey his tea in this outfit. Question, did you put on the schoolgirl outfit? Answer, yes. Question, why did you put on the schoolgirl outfit? Answer, I didn't know. I didn't know how to say no to that. I didn't know anybody in Florida. I'd never been to Palm Beach or Florida before. I had no idea even where the house was or how, and I wasn't sure if I said no, if I would have to leave or what kind of consequence there might be for not doing it. She was young looking for 17. She weighed all of 95 pounds. Question. Kate, do you remember the first time you saw Jeffrey Epstein naked? Answer, yes. Question, do you remember who was standing next to you? Answer, yes. Question, who was standing next to you? Answer, Ghislaine Maxwell. Question, how old were you? Answer, 17. Question, can you explain to the jury why you remember that so clearly? Answer, I remember it so clearly because I was terrified and frozen. Ghislaine Maxwell lied about all of that. Ghislaine Maxwell lied constantly and relentlessly for 9 hours to 2 federal prosecutors and an FBI agent, and she was rewarded for her lies. She was immediately transferred to a prison camp closer to her family in Texas that has been called a country club by a former federal prison official. Todd Blanche admitted in his rambling and usually lost questioning that there was no prosecutorial mission for those 2 days in Florida, that friendly conversation that he called great. He actually said, I don't have a plan. I didn't know that I was coming here until this week. It was true that Todd Blanche had no prosecutorial plan in that room. It was true that Todd Blanche had no legitimate Justice Department plan or reason for being in that room, but the Trump plan to get Ghislaine Maxwell to say nice things about Donald Trump and to praise Donald Trump was what those 2 days in Florida were all about. Those 2 days of friendly conversation in which at the end of day one, after Ghislaine Maxwell had already delivered her praise of Donald Trump, Todd Blanche could say, everything was great today. That
El testimonio de las víctimas y la documentación judicial son contundentes. Existió un sistema organizado de explotación, avalado por quienes tenían poder económico y político. La maniobra de Trump intentando convertir el caso en un asunto personal contra figuras públicas críticas no hace más que reforzar la percepción de que busca la conversación. La conexión entre Maxwell, los privilegios judiciales de los que gozó y las coincidencias con la estrategia de defensa de Trump son piezas de un mismo rompecabezas, un entramado de impunidad que sigue siendo protegido desde las más altas esferas. El debate sobre los archivos Epstein no es solo cuestión judicial, es una prueba de que hasta qué punto la política estadounidense está puesta a proteger a quienes forman parte de sus élites, incluso a toda costa de la verdad y de la justicia para las víctimas. Yo les pregunto a ustedes, ¿creen que el Departamento de Justicia está actuando contra un mediador imparcial o como un escudo político? Si este análisis te resultó útil, los invitamos a suscribirse a Rumor de Estado, dejar su like y compartir este video para que más personas puedan acceder a una mirada crítica de la política estadounidense.
El gobierno de Donald Trump navega entre el desorden y la opacidad. Esta semana, un hecho que apenas ha recibido cobertura mediática merece atención prioritaria: el ataque contra una embarcación venezolana en aguas internacionales, que dejó 11 muertos. La Casa Blanca lo presenta como un golpe contra el narcotráfico, pero múltiples fuentes advierten que podría tratarse de un acto ilegal, incluso de un crimen de guerra. La polémica crece porque dentro del propio partido republicano hay voces que lo señalan, y entre ellas la del senador Ron Paul. La respuesta del presidente fue una amenaza abierta que expone hasta dónde está dispuesto a llegar para silenciar críticas. Recordatorio rápido: si les interesa este análisis, apóyenos con un me gusta, suscribiéndose y comentando, ya que el 98% de quienes nos ven aún no están suscritos. Ayúdenos a llegar a 1000 suscriptores, nos haría muy feliz. Sin más, pasemos con la noticia.
We are getting more details about that U.S. strike on a Venezuelan speedboat the administration says killed 11 people on Tuesday, and many of those details only raise more questions. According to the New York Times, Pentagon officials were still working Wednesday on what legal authority they would tell the public was used to back up the extraordinary strike in international waters. That is so extraordinary, it's out of step with even the worst American administrations. I mean, the Bush White House after 9/11 had a whole written legal pretext that they developed for kidnapping and torturing terror suspects. It was a terrible pretext. It was a fig leaf. But they took the need for a legal narrative more seriously than this administration. And it gets worse. A former senior federal law enforcement official told the Times it was unusual to have 11 people manning a vessel that could easily be crewed by 2 or 3, especially since traffickers are always trying to maximize the amount of cargo space devoted to carrying drugs, not human beings. In this former official's opinion, it was more likely the vessel was carrying migrants on a human smuggling run. It would be impossible to know for sure, however, given that any evidence of drug smuggling was destroyed in the attack. So, did the United States just kill 11 drug runners via essentially summary execution, or did we kill 11 migrants via summary execution? Hard to say without evidence. And you can't look to Venezuela for answers. The government spokesman there is saying the video is just fake, that Trump and Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth have been sharing an AI fabrication. And there's kind of the point. I mean, no one should take the Venezuelan government's word for it, a country led by a strongman with little regard for the truth or human rights. You can't trust the word of a government like that, whether it's Caracas or Washington, D.C.
Más allá de la disputa narrativa entre Caracas y Washington, la clave es que el Ejecutivo actuó sin autorización del Congreso ni cobertura legal explícita. Se repite el patrón de una presidencia que busca gobernar sin contrapesos y que utiliza la fuerza militar para fines políticos.
On the Venezuela vessel strike, what legal authority were you guys working under, and will there be an after report on the strike?
Well, I'm sure there's going to be an after report. I mean, the legal authority, and I want to talk about these kids, is that there are people who are bringing literal terrorists who are bringing deadly drugs into our country, and the President of the United States ran on a promise of stopping this poison from coming into our country.
Esa es la línea de defensa, seguridad nacional como justificación suficiente, aunque no exista un respaldo normativo. Pero el costo de esa posición es enorme: legitimar la idea de que el presidente puede ordenar ejecuciones sin juicio ni investigación. Y así Donald Trump y el resto de su administración están yendo tras cualquiera que critique esta medida, como seguimos viendo hacer a J.D. Vance y Y fue entonces cuando Ron Paul respondió. Aquí tengo un post el cual J.D. Vance escribió en Twitter, el cual dice así: matar a miembros de carteles que envenenan a nuestros conciudadanos es el uso más alto y mejor de nuestras fuerzas armadas. A lo que un usuario de Twitter respondió: matar a ciudadanos de otra nación que son civiles sin ningún debido proceso se llama crimen de guerra. Vance le respondió enseguida: no me importa cómo lo llames. Ron Paul escribió: Vance dice que matar a personas a las que acusa de un crimen es el uso más alto y mejor de las fuerzas armadas. ¿Alguna vez leyó To Kill a Mockingbird? ¿Alguna vez se preguntó qué podría suceder si a los acusados se les ejecutara inmediatamente sin un juicio o representación? ¿Qué sentimiento despreciable e irreflexivo es glorificar matar a alguien sin un juicio? Se observa una fractura interna. No todos los republicanos están dispuestos a normalizar la violencia extrajudicial. Paul subraya un punto básico de Estado de Derecho. Sin debido proceso, el poder presidencial se convierte en arbitrariedad.
You know, I'm always for transparency, and I'm for releasing the documents. I do think that a disproportionate amount of time is spent on this. To my mind, the biggest pressing problem for the people in Washington should be the debt and the spending. That's our primary job up here. The Epstein thing is a little bit, it's been, I think, blown out of proportion. We haven't had any vote on our side. If there is a vote on transparency, I'll vote for transparency.
La coincidencia de todo esto no es casual. Quienes cuestionan la legalidad de la acción militar también reclaman claridad en el caso Epstein. El denominador común es la resistencia a que el Ejecutivo concentre poder absoluto y decida quién vive o muere, además de qué información llega al público.
Well, they haven't been misled, and the Speaker's point that the victim's safety is compromised or privacy is false, because when we asked the survivors at our event, did they support the legislation that Ro Khanna and I have introduced, they all said yes. Now, I don't know if the Speaker misspoke when he said that Donald Trump was an informant. The lawyers for the victims said that Donald Trump had been helpful in 2009 in their case by giving them information, but being an informant implies some formal connection and ongoing relationship with the FBI. I don't know what that's all about. I think the Speaker needs to clarify that. And if it's a hoax, why was Donald Trump an informant to a hoax?
Congressman Khanna, the effort to pick up Republican signatures appears to have stalled for right now. Are you still confident you have the 218 votes needed to force a vote on this discharge petition?
We have the 218 votes. 216 already support it. There are two vacancies that haven't been reported as much, but two Democrats are going to be joining, and they are both committed to signing it. That's going to happen by the end of September. But I want to just say this is not a political issue. This has nothing to do with Donald Trump. This is a moral issue. It's about standing with survivors. It's about protecting children. I admire Congressman Massey's courage. I admire Nancy Mace's courage, Marjorie Taylor Greene's courage, Lauren Boebert's courage. They are standing with survivors. We have the votes. Let's get a vote this month and get the files released.
Congressman Massey, even if you pass this through the House, the Senate Republican leader John Thune has made it pretty clear that he's going to block passage in the Senate. Can that be overcome? And if not, has anything been achieved?
Well, it's highly irregular for the Senate Majority Leader to talk about legislation that hasn't even passed. But the pressure that's on the House of Representatives right now is going to go to the Senate after this passes the House. I think we're going to get a resounding vote on this, and I think he's going to be under more pressure than he realizes. He should do the right thing. You know, there are some people saying that our effort is redundant, that the House Oversight Committee is doing all the work that needs to be done. If that were true, why would the administration and the establishment be so opposed to doing our legislation? The fact is it's not redundant. Our legislation is necessary, and Senator Thune should bring it up.
Congressman Khanna, the Speaker and President Trump are saying that if the Democrats really cared about this, you would have forced release under President Biden. What's your response to that?
First of all, we did in 2019 call for an investigation. I was on the Oversight Committee. Elijah Cummings called for that. Secondly, some of the files were being released by judges under President Biden. You had Pam Bondi and Donald Trump say we're going to release all the files, and not a single Democrat then contradicted them or criticized them. It is only when they said that there's nothing there, that Democrats began to speak up and Republicans began to speak up. But again, this is not something to score political points on Donald Trump. Many of the survivors actually pleaded with him. He could be the president who says, look, I'm the first president releasing these files. No, none of my predecessors did it. When I introduced the resolution, I actually didn't even think that this was a hostile act against him. I thought this would be a bipartisan move, and I've been surprised that he has taken it in that way.
Why do you think, Congressman Massey, the president is resisting the release?
I think it's going to be embarrassing to some of the billionaires, some of the donors who are politically connected to his campaign. I also think Democrats are going to be implicated in this, Democrat donors. And when you get to the billionaire level, a lot of these folks give to both parties anyway. There are probably intelligence ties to our CIA and maybe to other foreign intelligence, and the American people would be shocked, I think, to know that our intelligence agency was working with a pedophile who was running a sex trafficking ring. So these are the reasons I think that they're resisting this. But we can't avoid justice just to avoid embarrassment for some very powerful men.
Congressman Khanna, the Justice Department is controlled by President Trump. It's pretty clear right now. Are you concerned that even if you force the release, there will be some scrubbing of the files? Democrats will be implicated and Republicans won't?
It's a concern, but the victim's lawyer, Bradley Edwards, has seen the files, as have many people who are career officials. So if they try to do something that is political, then many other people would call them out on it. You know, you can get away with things, George, if the American people aren't paying attention. The American people are dialed into this. They want to know that is a country we can stand with survivors. The amount of messages I got from women who had been assaulted, who said, thank you for standing up for survivors, was overwhelming. And they want to know that we can protect our children. And they want to know that they're not two Americas, that rich and powerful people are going to be held to account for assaulting underage girls. I hope that this actually brings us together. I mean, the new roll call had Marjorie Taylor Greene and me hugging after an emotional moment. Some people criticized me, but other people said the survivors are actually bringing this country together around fundamental values.
Ya a estas alturas, el contraste es evidente. Mientras Trump multiplica amenazas y busca encubrir, un grupo de legisladores republicanos y demócratas apuesta por exponer el material completo. La disputa ya no es solo sobre Epstein ni sobre Venezuela, es sobre si el país acepta que la presidencia se coloque por encima de la ley. A todo esto, pues este episodio del ataque en Venezuela refleja un patrón que se ha ido repitiendo. Acciones militares sin un sustento legal, secretismos en casos de alto perfil como Epstein y hostigamiento a voces críticas, incluso dentro del propio partido. Se trata de un estilo de gobierno basado en la fuerza y el silencio más que en la rendición de cuentas. La defensa de J.D. Vance y otros aliados muestran cómo parte del Congreso está dispuesto a avalar este camino, mientras que las intervenciones de Ron Paul, Khanna y Massey recuerdan que aún hay sectores que reclaman límites y transparencia. El problema central no es solo un bombardeo ni un solo archivo sellado, es la normalización de un ejecutivo que opera al margen de la legalidad. Y la pregunta que queda abierta es si la presión bipartidista alcanzará para frenar esta deriva antes de que se convierta en la norma. Ahora, si este análisis les resultó útil, suscríbanse, dejen un me gusta y compartan este video. Como dijimos al inicio, el 98% de quienes nos ven no están suscritos. Ayúdenos a crecer esta comunidad y llegar a 1000 suscriptores. Nos vemos en el próximo Rumor de Estado.
Donald Trump ha encontrado el miedo en una herramienta de política central. Cada vez que enfrenta una crisis, responde con la misma fórmula: exagerar amenazas, criminalizar a comunidades enteras y presentarse como el único capaz de imponer orden. Su más reciente discurso no es una excepción. Al invocar la necesidad de mano dura y ley y orden, Trump no solo busca recuperar autoridad, sino también legitimar un proyecto de vigilancia y represión que avanza en silencio. Antes de empezar el video, quiero recordarte que si te está gustando lo que estás viendo, no olvides darle like, suscribirte y comentar, que nos ayuda mucho. El 98% de las personas no están suscritas. Dicho esto, pasamos a video.
That got sent to us last night. And we have been pushing James Comer and the Republicans every single step of the way to do the right thing. We demanded Alex Acosta to come in front of the committee. That's going to happen in just over a week. We forced a subpoena vote in a committee for a release of the full files. Their leadership did not support that. We made them vote and get there. We are the ones that demanded the Epstein estate book and the documents, and we finally got it. The truth is that James Comer and the oversight Republicans have no idea how to deal with an aggressive, next-generation, forceful oversight committee that is going to work every single day to get the truth. And they are up against a force on that committee that is right now focused on censoring the victims, getting justice, and bringing the fire every single day. Donald Trump needs to understand that we will not rest until we get justice and the truth comes out.
Trump utiliza tragedias reales para impulsar una agenda política. No se trata de empatía por las víctimas ni de preocupación por la seguridad política, sino de una estrategia que le permite fortalecer el discurso de miedo y justificar la expansión de un aparato autoritario. Al presentar la criminalidad como un fenómeno exclusivo de ciudades demócratas, el presidente intenta dividir el país en campos enemigos y atribuir la violencia a una identidad política. Es un cálculo político, no una solución a los problemas estructurales de la seguridad.
It's very clear President Trump did not draw this picture and he did not sign it. President Trump's legal team will continue to aggressively pursue litigation.
Well, look, when Donald Trump said first this didn't exist, and then we found it, and now he's saying he didn't sign it, his signature just looks just like his own signature. It's like the bank robber who's caught with a bag full of cash and says, I'm not the one who robbed the bank. I mean, everyday Americans just aren't going to keep on buying these sorts of excuses, and we're going to keep investigating this case, not just to have transparency around the president, but transparency around any powerful.
El verdadero peligro no está en las frases encendidas de Trump, sino en las decisiones concretas que acompañan a este discurso. Reactivar contratos con compañías que desarrollan programas de espionaje masivo abre la puerta a un Estado que puede vigilar sin límites a periodistas, activistas y ciudadanos comunes. La vigilancia digital deja de ser un recurso contra el crimen y se convierte en un instrumento de control político. Bajo lo mencionado como el orden, lo que se consolida es la erosión de derechos fundamentales.
With Democrat-run cities that set loose savage, bloodthirsty criminals to prey on innocent people, really very, very innocent people. And here's a picture of it. This is the picture of it. And this is a picture of the woman, a beautiful young girl that never had problems in life. We cannot allow a depraved criminal element of violent repeat offenders to continue spreading destruction and death throughout our country. We have to respond with force and strength. We have to be vicious just like they are. It's the only thing they understand. All we want is, please, Mr. President, we need help. Chicago needs help. Other cities need help. We'll do what has to be done because we're going to make America safe again. And that
La autorización para que las autoridades migratorias actúen bajo criterios étnicos confirma que no se trata únicamente de tecnología, sino de un marco institucional que mantiene la discriminación. La política de Trump no busca resolver la migración ni la violencia urbana. Busca moldear un país donde la diferencia cultural se persigue, la protesta se desincentiva y la vigilancia permanente se normaliza. En ese escenario, los ganadores no son los ciudadanos más seguros, sino las corporaciones privadas que se enriquecen con cada nuevo contrato. Y los políticos se convierten en el miedo en el capital electoral.
This spring, reporting from Italy showed that spyware made by Paragon was turning up on the phones of immigration activists and at least one journalist and a friend of Pope Francis. Again, the company's called Paragon. The Biden administration last year stopped that company's contract with ICE. And that made a lot of sense when they did that in 2024. It made sense to stop that contract in 2024. It might make sense in 2025 for the U.S. government to still not have contracts with firms like that, right? I mean, under American principles, like the right to privacy and free speech and peaceful protest and the Fourth Amendment prohibitions against unreasonable search and seizure, no-click spyware that can surveil everything about you without you knowing, it doesn't make that much sense for our government to have that kind of power. We don't want that stuff turning up on the phones of people in our country, right? Well, I said this was a heads-up kind of segment. Here's the headline that gives us all the heads up on this. Quote, ICE reactivated its $2 million contract with Israeli spyware firm Paragon. This reporting from tech journalist Jack Polson was soon confirmed by Wired, and then it was confirmed by the Washington Post. And it does appear that the Trump administration has decided to reactivate the contract with that spyware company. The Washington Post reports that it's not clear why the contract has been reactivated or what exactly happens next or what ICE is going to do with this type of technology. The Post was unable to get comment from the company in question. But this company makes total surveillance technology of a type that has been linked to some of the scariest human rights abuses in the developed world. And of course, the news that Trump wants ICE to have it comes just as the Supreme Court has given the go-ahead for the Trump administration to restart roving immigration patrols in Los Angeles, in which ICE admits they're going after people on the basis of their ethnicity. It comes just as the Trump administration announces a new immigration blitz in the great city of Chicago. I mean, yeah, with what Trump is having ICE do and the possibility of ICE having access to this kind of technology, what could possibly go wrong, right? Set yourself a news alert on this company, Paragon. On this one, you are definitely going to want.
El giro hacia un modelo de vigilancia total y represión selectiva muestra que Trump no solo pretende regresar al poder, sino hacerlo bajo un proyecto más autoritario que nunca. Lo que está en juego no es solo una elección, sino la permanencia de un sistema democrático que paso a paso se ve debilitado por la lógica del miedo. Yo te pregunto a ti, ¿creen que la narrativa de ley y orden de Trump busca realmente la seguridad o solo busca consolidar el poder político? Si este análisis te resultó valioso, los invitamos a suscribirse a Rumor de Estado, dejar su like, compartir y comentar este video para seguir examinando el trasfondo del poder político en Estados Unidos.
Donald Trump no siente pena por Charlie Kirk ni lo considera una pérdida personal. Para él, la muerte de Kirk es un recurso político, un escudo frente a críticas por su deriva autoritaria y, sobre todo, un pretexto para desviar la atención de los archivos Epstein. Lo vimos inmediato, intentó culpar a un supuesto atacante trans y hablar de violencia contra conservadores de color, una mentira grotesca que se desplomó al instante y dejó a Trump expuesto, obligado a huir del tema. Pero antes de entrar cómo lo atraparon y cómo se esconde, déjenme pedirles un favor rápido. Denle me gusta, suscríbanse si aún no lo han hecho y ayúdenos a crecer esta comunidad. El 98% de quienes nos ven todavía no están suscritos y juntos podemos hacer crecer esta bella comunidad. Ahora sí, pasemos con lo importante.
Nobody who's being an honest broker can possibly believe that the Democratic rhetoric is the problem here. So if the issue is that we're saying all the time that he's like Hitler and he's a threat to democracy, and by the way, J.D. Vance has also said that he's like Hitler, and I guess he's redeemed now, but Donald Trump sent a fundraising email just last week that said Joe Biden is a threat to democracy. And only one of these candidates has inspired people who sent pipe bombs to leading Democrats across the country, who has inspired mass shooters. Talk about firing up the base. Donald Trump has been doing that since 2016. Remember when he said the Second Amendment people could take care of it? When he was talking about Hillary Clinton abolishing the Second Amendment and she'll get to appoint judges. He talked about, remember that congressman from Montana who body slammed a reporter and he said, he's my type. He retruthed or whatever it was, a video of Joe Biden hogtied. Just back in my...
That was hilarious.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Your
hilarious.
examples are so tiny.
No, they're
We're
not.
talking about an attempted assassination that left a man dead. A shooter groomed and incentivized by a drumbeat of demonization. You can call people...
Lo que Tarlov señaló sigue vigente. La violencia política nace en gran parte de la ultraderecha y se nutre del mismo discurso que Trump y sus aliados promueven desde 2016. Charlie Kirk no era un mártir de la libertad de expresión. Construyó su carrera atacando a mujeres negras, a estudiantes trans y a cualquiera que no encajara en su molde. Ahora pretenden que todos lo lloremos mientras su familia política convierte la tragedia en mercancía, así como veremos a continuación.
We're trying to do to our family what the movement that we created, and it's a movement of good. It's exactly what Charlie epitomized. And I launched it on literally Wednesday of this week. I announced this book, and you better believe New York Times and everybody's going to do everything they can to quash what I'm trying to do, because it is so raw and so damn powerful. And I do not hold back, and I give every inside story about the corruption. And then 2 days later, literally 2 days later after I announced this book, you know, we're all watching and we see exactly what happened to Charlie. That is us being under siege, Benny. That is our party. That is our movement.
Me van a decir que debo sentir lástima. De ninguna manera. Van a decirle a una mujer negra que tiene que lamentar la muerte de Charlie Kirk, un hombre que afirmó que las mujeres negras no merecen empleos y que solo los obtienen robándolos porque no son lo suficientemente inteligentes. Eso fue lo que dijo Charlie Kirk sobre las mujeres afrodescendientes. ¿Y quieren que esa misma mujer negra se sienta obligada a llorar por Kirk mientras Eric Trump aprovecha la ocasión para vender su libro en Fox o en el programa de Benny Johnson? No, basta, no vamos a hacer eso. No nos van a forzar a pedir disculpas por una situación alimentada por la propia retórica de Charlie Kirk, por la oposición que él mismo impulsó contra cualquier intento serio de reforma de armas. No habrá disculpas y no vamos a callar ni suavizar el discurso con falsas cortesías políticas. Donald Trump provocó esto. Sus mentiras quedaron expuestas. El atacante no fue el radical izquierda que inventaron y por eso el presidente huye de la realidad que lo persigue. Aquí tenemos un contexto en el cual se los voy a traer junto a un post, el cual comenzamos con este tweet, el cual un reportero pues escribió, que dice así: según funcionarios de Utah y entrevistas policiales con su familia, Tyler Robinson odiaba a Charlie Kirk porque no era lo suficientemente conservador. Los republicanos ahora están borrando publicaciones sobre los demócratas más rápido de lo que el Departamento de Justicia borra el nombre de Trump en los archivos de Epstein. Y por supuesto, Donald Trump, sin más distracciones, se está retirando a su club de golf en Nueva Jersey en medio de tensiones económicas, escándalos de Epstein y su incapacidad de manipular la narrativa sobre la muerte de Charlie Kirk. Según la Casa Blanca, Donald Trump se dirigirá a su club de golf Bedminster, Nueva Jersey, el viernes por la noche después de un día en Nueva York que incluyó una entrevista en vivo con Fox and Friends y una cena en el primer ministro de Qatar. Según la agenda de prensa de la Casa Blanca, Trump saldrá de Manhattan alrededor de las 9:40 para su retiro a fin de semana. El viaje de golf llega mientras nuevos datos económicos muestran un aumento de los precios al consumidor y cifras de empleo más débiles de lo esperado, lo que aumenta la presión sobre el mensaje económico de la administración. Mientras la Casa Blanca ha intentado enfatizar el crecimiento y la estabilidad, que mentira, las nuevas cifras destacan por desafíos persistentes que enfrentan los hogares mientras Trump se dedica a un ocio más personal. Pues bueno, mientras tanto, Trump se refugia en su club de golf. El país lidia con cifras económicas preocupantes y con escándalos que lo salpica, pero él prefiere bromear en la televisión y posar como si nada. Es la misma actitud de siempre, el mostrarse como el líder fuerte mientras se esconden de los problemas reales.
Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. So now all of a sudden, the Republicans who were so aggressively intent on releasing the Epstein files because they were going to be a huge, explosive story about Democrats involved with Jeffrey Epstein are quiet. So the irony of these Republicans accusing the Democrats now of only being interested in this is for political purposes is so thick that it is almost sucking us into the quicksand. But let's go a step further. Let's go a step further. Because now the cover-up is getting so deep and so intense that this committee, which has oversight over the Department of Justice and would ordinarily be the one that is doing this investigation, is running away from it. Why? Because Chairman Comer is the useful idiot who will do the cover-up for Donald Trump. And what does that mean? Oh, well, now there is an oversight investigation, but you know what they're not asking for?
Those kind of comments, and he knows that. Gentleman's recognized.
Now, the Oversight Committee is doing an investigation, but you know what they're not asking for? You know what you did not put in the rule to confirm that investigation? We're not asking for the documents that were used to open the investigation, who provided the information. They're not asking for witness statements, victim witness statements. They're not asking for recordings that may exist. They're not asking for any of the evidence that might include Donald Trump. And rather than acknowledge that you're just trying to cover up for Donald Trump's knowledge and involvement in the Jeffrey Epstein scheme, you're trying to accuse us
Asimismo, entonces, lo que hemos visto esta semana dibuja un patrón muy claro. Donald Trump intenta gobernar desde el capricho, explota tragedias, huye de responsabilidades y utiliza el poder institucional para blindarse frente a la verdad. La muerte de Charlie Kirk se ha convertido para él en otra pieza dentro de un tablero de manipulación política. Pero el verdadero peligro no está en las mentiras aisladas, sino en el uso sistemático de la desinformación para silenciar debates urgentes, la violencia armada, el racismo y sobre todo el encubrimiento de la red de Epstein. Un presidente que reacciona con frivolidad ante el dolor y que juega golf mientras el país se tambalea no está simplemente desconectado. Está demostrando que el poder lo concibe como un privilegio personal, no como una responsabilidad pública. Esa es la señal más grave para cualquier democracia. Y si no se le confronta, lo que hoy son encubrimientos y excusas mañanas pueden considerarse en un sistema de impunidad total. Por último, si este análisis les resultó útil, suscríbanse, dejen su me gusta y compartan este video. Como dijimos al inicio, el 98% de quienes nos ven no están suscritos todavía. Ayúdenos a crecer esta comunidad y llegar a los 1000 suscriptores. Nos vemos en el próximo Rumor de Estado.
La desaparición de un evento presidencial no suele ser un simple accidente de agenda. Cuando un presidente cancela sin explicación, lo que está en juego es mucho más que un retraso. Y eso fue lo que ocurrió cuando Donald Trump evitó presentarse ante la prensa en medio del creciente escándalo que lo vincula con Jeffrey Epstein. El silencio en este caso dice más que cualquier palabra. Un recordatorio rápido. Si te está gustando lo que estás viendo, no olvides suscribirte, darle a like, comentar y compartir este video. El 98% de las personas no están suscritas. Dicho esto, pasamos a video.
To be very clear, Donald Trump and the president, not only is this issue not dead, it's not a hoax, but we're also just getting started. And so we have an enormous amount of work ahead of us. We've been talking to victims. We've been, of course, meeting with representatives of the survivors. We now, of course, got this book released. And there's a lot more information ahead of us for our committee to actually not just investigate, but to review. And so later this week, we will have a team from the Oversight Committee in New York looking at all of the Epstein estate materials, because what's really important is that any redactions that are currently in place, like you've obviously shown some redactions already, we have to verify those on the actual documents to make sure that what's not being redacted is somehow pertinent to our investigation, or that somehow those that have caused the violence and the rape and the suffering are somehow being protected. And so that is critical, not just in the Epstein estate documents, but also in any documents that we get from the Department of Justice. And this just incredible, the amount of lies and the audacity of House Republicans, Mike Johnson, to go around D.C., to get on TV, to call this a hoax, to say the letter somehow wasn't written by Donald Trump. I mean, the blatant lies is completely outrageous. And they have to understand, the American public every day understands more and more that this is a White House cover-up of a convicted sex trafficking ring that was not just here in this country, but was international. Donald Trump with Jeffrey Epstein's best friend for Jeffrey Epstein for 15 years. There's a picture of Donald Trump on Jeffrey Epstein's desk. Give me a break. There is a cover-up going on.
Lo que expone el congresista Robert García es clave. No se trata de solo nombres o de documentos, sino de un patrón de encubrimiento. La insistencia de algunos republicanos en minimizar, negar o incluso calificar de falsificación la evidencia relacionada con Trump y Epstein no responde a la búsqueda de la verdad, sino un esfuerzo coordinado por blindar al presidente. El detalle que más preocupa es que los archivos de Epstein contienen redacciones y omisiones deliberadas. ¿Quién decide qué se oculta? ¿Quién protege a quién? En este punto, la investigación no solo pone bajo escrutinio a Trump, sino que también a instituciones que, por acción u omisión, han permitido que un caso de explotación y tráfico internacional quede en plena rendición de cuentas.
Not one mistake. What? They haven't deported a single American citizen. Not one. All you can point to, your one guy is a Maryland dad that beats his wife and traffics children. That's your guy. That's your mistake. That's your guy.
No.
I think they're batting 1,000. Prove me wrong.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Okay. Well, I hate to bring up your other favorite person.
Don't gay hairdresser.
He is
Never
a
heard of him.
Well, he's somebody who was sexually assaulted repeatedly in CCOT and wasn't supposed to be sent there, which is why they had to be sent back.
And even I believe anything that comes out of your mouth on immigration?
Think that's... Oh.
I don't believe it. She said the Maryland dad was American dad.
No, I didn't call him that. You said I did. You think it's a ventriloquist act, and it's not. People know the difference between my voice and your voice.
That's
Mine is
where
more
my
shrill.
hand has been.
Hands to yourself, my friend. You say this is up to Congress. You should fix it. Guess what? There was a bipartisan bill that Donald Trump personally killed. James Lankford, who is no rhino, who is no...
We've already debated and debunked
Get
this
your
stupid
hand
hoax.
out of my back. I'm talking. There was a bipartisan bill. Donald Trump needed to run on it. So he said, get rid of it.
Why didn't you
And they
do it in the
dutifully
first 2 years
fixed
when
it.
you had the House, the Senate, and the White House then?
Mistakes. Because even up where Tom Homan lives, you remember this story, and we talked about it, that there was a woman who was in her house. She has 3 kids. She's here, undocumented. She was in the Wi-Fi zone of someone that they had a warrant for. They came and took her.
Oh,
and
so
this
she was
entire
illegal
town,
and they deported her.
No,
Wow. That's
to
your
the
example?
average person. No, well, I gave you an example, but you just don't care about
A
anyone
gay
who goes to
hairdresser in El
El Salvador. This is what the point is.
Never heard of
The
them.
statistics based on ICE data.
Mientras tanto, el mismo gobierno que busca silenciar las preguntas incómodas sobre Epstein despliega toda su maquinaria para mostrar firmeza en otras áreas. Las deportaciones y mano dura se convierten en una cortina de humo, pero detrás hay un modelo más preocupante: la privatización del control social. Empresas como Palantir, vinculadas a grandes donantes de Trump, reciben contratos millonarios para desarrollar tecnologías de vigilancia. Lo que se presenta como política migratoria es, en realidad, un laboratorio de control ciudadano. La vigilancia ya no se limita a las fronteras. Se proyecta hacia la vida cotidiana de millones de personas. Esto no es solo política migratoria, es la construcción de un estado de excepción permanente, donde la seguridad se convierte en excusa para consolidar el poder.
Barbary pirates were attacking us and taking our sailors and capturing our ships. They were committing acts of war against us, and fighting them is self-defense. And if this speedboat, 2,700 miles from our coast, was attacking one of our destroyers, they can blow it up.
Well, hold on,
Nobody
real quick,
argues
Senator.
with
The
that.
narco-terrorists are attacking in a different fashion. It's not as on the nose as what the Barbary Pirates
I know.
did. They're importing drugs that do kill Americans to the tune of 65,000 Americans a year.
I realize that. But if this is a new policy, realize that off of Miami, a dozen ships will be interdicted today. They will be stopped, boarded, and searched. Some of them will have drugs, some of them won't. The reason we board them before we blow the crap out of them is some of them don't have drugs. Think about it this way, and this is how people don't quite get this. Let's say there's a house in your neighborhood and they're all selling fentanyl and thousands of people are dying and you're just so mad. Do you go over there and just kill them or burn them? No, you go to a judge and you get a warrant and you do that.
But
we
Senator,
have an interdiction program.
I feel like the difference there is you're talking about an American citizen on an American soil. And of
No,
course,
we're
your
talking
analogy,
about ships off of Miami. We're talking about people speeding along off of Miami. Are we going to just simply blow them up? No, we're
Well,
not. I mean, if
let me
we
give you a
were, that
scenario
would be
back.
extraordinary. That would be
Let me give you a scenario
extraordinary to
back.
blow up ships. We have dozens of ships every day stopped for drugs. Is the new policy going to be blow them to smithereens with drones? I can't imagine that's going to be our policy. It would lead to chaos. We have dozens of ships. Think of it also this way. I'm not saying this is U.S. citizens, but when we try to protect U.S. citizens' rights, we still make mistakes. We get a judge's warrant, we send the police to a house. Sometimes the numbers get transposed and they go in the wrong house and the wrong people die, even with the utmost care. What are the chances?
Incluso dentro del propio Partido Republicano empiezan a surgir fisuras. La crítica de Ron Paul a las acciones militares de Trump revela un punto central: la tendencia a expandir el poder presidencial sin controles efectivos. La idea de atacar embarcaciones en aguas internacionales sin el debido proceso no es una política aislada. Es la manifestación de un liderazgo que concibe la ley como un obstáculo y no como un límite legítimo de poder. El patrón es notorio: silencio frente a los escándalos que lo comprometen, agresividad extrema frente a cualquier escenario donde se pueda proyectar fuerza. La lógica del poder de Trump combina ocultamiento y espectáculo, pero ambos responden a la misma necesidad: evitar la rendición de cuentas. La pregunta es, ¿qué tan sostenible es esta estrategia? ¿Puede un presidente esquivar indefinidamente la presión mediática, judicial y política? ¿Qué significa para la democracia estadounidense que las instituciones se plieguen al silencio? Y lo más importante, ¿qué responsabilidad tienen los ciudadanos en exigir transparencia ante casos que combinan poder político, dinero y crímenes de explotación? Y yo les pregunto a ustedes, ¿creen que la investigación sobre Epstein llegará a tocar a Trump directamente o será bloqueada como tantas otras? ¿Está Estados Unidos frente a un modelo de vigilancia que permanecerá más allá de Trump? Si te gustó el video, no olvides suscribirte, darle like, comentar y compartir el video, que nos ayuda mucho. Esto es Rumor de Estado. Hoy, en Rumor de Estado, cada acto de violencia política es un golpe profundo contra la democracia. Cada tiroteo en Estados Unidos es también la confirmación de una crisis que dejó de ser un problema aislado para convertirse en una epidemia nacional. Lo ocurrido con la muerte de Charlie Kirk debería abrir un debate urgente sobre el acceso indiscriminado a las armas. Sin embargo, lo que hemos visto es otra cosa. Un sector político que, en lugar de buscar soluciones, intenta convertir la tragedia en capital político. Un recordatorio rápido: si te está gustando lo que estás viendo, no olvides suscribirte, darle like y comentar. El 98% de las personas no están suscritas. Dicho esto, pasamos a video.
This hits differently because Charlie was one of us. And Trump gets hit in the ear. Charlie gets shot dead. They came after Kavanaugh with a rifle to his neighborhood. They went after Musk's cars. They just shot 2 Jews outside the embassy. Think about it. Scalise got shot, barely survived. It's happening. You got trans shooters. You got riots in LA. They are at war with us. Whether we want to accept it or not, they are at war.
El primer reflejo de las figuras más cercanas a Donald Trump y el movimiento MAGA no fue la empatía ni la prudencia, fue la manipulación. Desde programas de opinión en cadena conservadoras hasta líderes republicanos en el Congreso. La narrativa no ha girado en torno a cómo detener la violencia armada, sino en reforzar la idea de que Estados Unidos se encuentra en una guerra interna. Ese discurso no solo evade responsabilidades, también alimenta un clima de confrontación permanente que normaliza el odio y convierte la política en un terreno de venganza. Lo que debería ser un momento de reflexión se transforma en una estrategia de movilización partidista.
Question for my colleague from the state of Louisiana, because I'm curious as to where your bill is. Louisiana is the state with the second highest rate of deaths in this nation. You are more likely to be shot standing on a random street in your state than you are in Washington, D.C. So my question is, where's your bill for the occupation of the state of Louisiana to keep your people safe, if you're at all sincere in this?
Gentlemen, yield for an answer.
I yield for an answer.
I support state rights. I'm a constitutionalist.
But not D.C.?
Stand by. As a constitutionalist, I support my state, my sovereign state's legislature, which is doing everything it can to push back upon the crime rate of the Democrat-controlled cities.
Okay, so I'll take my time back. I'll take my time back.
If you remove
That's the rules.
the crime stats
That's
of
the
New
rules.
Orleans,
I'll take my time back.
Louisiana,
I'll take my time back. So you only invoke the rules when other people are speaking, not when you're speaking. Okay.
That's your time.
I agree with you. Look, I'm for state sovereignty. So what do you think about California?
Well, California is not where I live.
La reacción de Donald Trump revela todavía más. Tras el asesinato de Kirk, el presidente ordenó que todas las banderas en el país ondearan a media asta, un gesto solemne, cargado de simbolismo político. Pero este mismo Trump no ofreció ni una palabra de condolencia cuando apenas hace una semana otra figura política, la expresidenta de la Cámara de Representantes de Minnesota, Melissa Hortman, perdió la vida en un ataque con claras motivaciones extremistas. La diferencia no está en la gravedad de los hechos, sino en la utilidad política de la víctima. Trump y su movimiento reaccionan no en función de principios universales, sino de conveniencias momentáneas. Este doble rasero se refleja también en el Congreso. Mientras los republicanos repiten que hablar de control de armas es politizar una tragedia, se niegan a debatir proyectos de ley que podrían salvar vidas. En los estados con mayores índices de violencia armada, sus representantes bloquean cualquier intento de reforma y, en paralelo, culpan a las ciudades gobernadas por demócratas de una inseguridad que no reconocen en sus propias jurisdicciones. Lo que vemos es un vacío de principios. No hay una voluntad real de resolver cada crisis, solo una maquinaria de discurso diseñada para señalar culpables, distraer y mantener intacto el negocio de las armas.
Mr. Chairman, just following up on a little bit of what the ranking member was discussing, there was a significant event this week in which this committee has jurisdiction over. The Speaker of the House, the third highest ranking U.S. official, third in line to be the president, looked into the TV cameras and told us that the current president of the United States was an FBI informant. I consider that to be gigantic news. And I'm just curious, have we reached out to the FBI, to Kash Patel, to confirm whether the president was at any time an FBI informant? I only say that because the Speaker of the House obviously gets significant briefings. He gets briefings that we do not get as regular members. And so I think this is something that we need to hear definitively. Before Kash Patel comes, we should clear up, maybe that we should send a letter to him to find out if the president was an informant. And if he was an informant, is that because he was working with the FBI after he was hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein? Did he turn because he got caught with Jeffrey Epstein? You know, when you're an FBI informant, there are lots of questions about how you became an FBI informant. And then how long was he an FBI informant? When did his service to the FBI stop, you know, being a member of the deep state? When did he stop doing that? I mean, look, if a regular member had said this, I would discount it. But the Speaker of the House is the one who said it. And then he said afterwards, well, I may have misspoke. Well, what was his misspeak? Instead of informant, did he mean agent? I mean, what is the misspeak for informant? I mean, I don't know another word that we use when we're describing an FBI agent or FBI informant or undercover. I mean, what was the misspeak here? And if he was lying then, is he lying now? I'm just confused. Perhaps maybe the Speaker should come to our committee and tell us what he meant when he said that. It's just...
Point of order.
I'm still speaking.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm still speaking.
Is there a bill or an amendment on the floor?
I strike the last word. I'm allowed to finish my...
Gentleman from Florida has the time. He's speaking, I think he's speaking about the bill. Well, he's not really speaking about the bill, but he's recognized to speak about the bill.
Well, he's just been interrupted for about 30 seconds. I'd ask that it be added back onto his...
Can we move to restore his time? That was a completely improper interjection.
Time is stopped. We'll give him plenty of time. I'm usually good about that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your indulgence, and I'm only bringing it up again because this committee is the committee of jurisdiction over the FBI, and I don't think in the history of this country we've had a Speaker of the House say the president was an FBI informant. I mean, that's a dual role if I ever heard one. And so I just think we have questions, Mr. Chairman, and on a bipartisan basis. Maybe the answer is no, he wasn't an FBI informant, and that's fine if the answer is no. I just think we need to hear from the FBI. The Speaker has confused the American people whether Trump was working with the FBI.
Lo ocurrido con Charlie Kirk es una tragedia, pero también es una tragedia que el país carezca de un consenso básico para detener la violencia armada. Las lágrimas y los homenajes no sustituyen las políticas públicas, y mientras tanto, quienes hoy deciden estar de luto seguirán impulsando narrativas que dividen, en lugar de impulsar soluciones que protejan vidas. El contraste es evidente. Cuando la violencia toca a los suyos, la reacción es inmediata y simbólica. Cuando afecta a otros, el silencio y la indiferencia se imponen. Esa incoherencia no es casual, es parte de un proyecto político que se alimenta del conflicto, no de la justicia. Si este análisis te resultó útil, te invitamos a suscribirte, dejar un like y compartir este video para que más personas puedan unirse a la conversación. Esto es Rumor de Estado. La muerte de Charlie Kirk no solo ha sacudido el espectro político de Estados Unidos, también ha expuesto una estrategia conocida. Cuando los hechos contradicen la situación, la respuesta de Donald Trump y sus aliados no es el silencio, es la manipulación. En lugar de un duelo, lo que hemos visto es una maquinaria propagandística en marcha, intentando convertir una tragedia en un recurso político. Si te está gustando el video, no olvides suscribirte, darle a like, comentar y compartir. El 98% de las personas no están suscritas. Dicho esto, pasamos a video.
So they have to resort to violence. And contrary to what we're seeing elsewhere and online, it is not going both ways. It is going one way. It's coming from those aligned with the Democrat Party. The hate has been fomented by those in the Democrat Party, and you can probably play hundreds of hours of those clips. It's coming from the media. Some of them are doing a quick course correction and probably scrub their social media feeds for all the things they've said about Charlie, myself, my father over the last few years. But you can't call someone who you disagree with or simply can't win an argument with a Nazi, a fascist, a dictator, a greatest threat to democracy in the history of civilization, and then pretend you had nothing to do with it when the more radical wing, and there does not seem to be all that much difference to me these days, takes up arms and tries to kill those they disagree with. It's not one way. It's not both ways. It is simply one way. And anyone who's saying otherwise, should be thrown.
Lo que escuchamos no es un análisis, es un intento deliberado de trasladar responsabilidades. Mientras figuras del entorno de Trump apuntan contra los demócratas, los propios familiares del sospechoso han dejado claro que se trata de alguien proveniente de un hogar identificado con el trumpismo. Esa contradicción destruye de raíz el relato oficial de la derecha. En este punto vale la pena detenerse. ¿Qué significa que, incluso con los hechos en contra, se insista en mantener un discurso falso? Significa que el objetivo no es la verdad, sino preservar un relato que se movilice en emociones, miedo, odio y victimización. Esto ha sido el patrón del trumpismo desde su origen.
From Mark Milley and from John Kelly, who gave on-the-record interviews. You can hear it in John Kelly's own voice talking about it. And the central premise of this and of so many things when it comes to Donald Trump is that we should just not take his words seriously. That Kamala's words matter and what Donald Trump says doesn't. Because guess what? Donald Trump calls Kamala a fascist quite regularly. He did it last month a couple times. He did it in August. Jake Tapper, just in the last hour, was playing audio of. But they aren't using this because they're not getting it from a direct source that worked with him. So they're getting this from Mark Milley and from John Kelly, who gave on-the-record interviews. You can hear it in John Kelly's own voice talking about it. And the central premise of this and of so many things when it comes to Donald Trump is that we should just not take his words seriously. That Kamala's words matter and what Donald Trump says doesn't. Because guess what? Donald Trump calls Kamala a fascist quite regularly. He did it last month a couple times. He did it in August. Jake Tapper, just in the last hour, was playing audio of it. And so not only does he call her a fascist, he also calls her a communist. And last time I checked, communists were pretty bad. Mao, Stalin, they're responsible for over 100 million people's deaths. George Bush commemorated the lives lost to communism in 2007, I believe that it was. So spare me.
El problema no es solo que Donald Trump mienta, sino que esas mentiras son amplificadas por medios y operadores políticos que las presentan como hechos. El caso Kirk revela cómo funciona esta dinámica. Un crimen es inmediatamente manipulado, se señalan culpables sin pruebas y se exige el silencio a quienes cuestionan al presidente. La ironía es que mientras acusan a la oposición de inflamar la problemática, son precisamente ellos quienes convierten cada tragedia en una herramienta de polarización. El resultado es predecible: más división, más radicalización y un país atrapado en una situación construida sobre falsedades. Aquí conviene recordar otro punto. La figura de Charlie Kirk, presentada ahora como mártir, fue en realidad un actor político que capitalizó la confrontación y el discurso del odio. Sus actividades no buscaban abrir espacios de debate, sino producir materia viral que reforzará a una base radicalizada. Convertirlo en un símbolo de libertad de expresión es reescribir su trayectoria. La conclusión es clara. Lo que estamos presenciando no es un homenaje sincero, sino la construcción de un mito útil para la maquinaria MAGA. Y como ha ocurrido en otras ocasiones, este mito se derrumba en cuanto aparecen los hechos. Un caso vinculado a un entorno trumpista, una familia que se contradice y un presidente más preocupado por sus intereses personales que por el país.
At length about the importance of vaccines. In fact, one of your slides stated, quote, clusters of under or non-immunization have the potential to foster transmission of vaccine-preventable diseases, including measles. Is this a slide from your presentation, yes or no?
I haven't reviewed that presentation recently,
so we're going to go you don't know. You work under someone who has become the face of the anti-vax movement. So who's right, you or the secretary?
Thank you so much for that.
You or the secretary?
I would like to tell you that Secretary
You or the
Kennedy
secretary?
is challenging us to use gold standard.
So you're going to filibuster, and I only have 25 seconds. So I'm going to go with you, assume you, but you know that he's your boss. This administration has lost all credibility with the American people and our global partners. No one believes you care about improving health outcomes when you're slashing NIH research into Alzheimer's disease, women's health, cancer, and diabetes. No one believes you care about public health when you cut programs that support maternal and child health and eliminate Healthy Start. No one believes you care about children when you implement the largest cut to Medicaid in history. Americans know the truth, and the truth is that this administration, with the help of congressional Republicans, has unleashed the most significant assault on public health in American history. The people will die as a result. I yield back the remainder of my time.
La muerte de Charlie Kirk expone algo más grande, el deterioro de un movimiento político que ya no se controla ni ellos mismos. Cuando la mentira choca contra la realidad, lo único que queda es la explotación del dolor. Y aquí queremos preguntarle, ¿creen que la maquinaria mediática de Trump aún tiene la capacidad de imponer su versión a los hechos? ¿Qué impacto tendrá el movimiento MAGA que las mentiras sean desmentidas por las propias familias implicadas? No olviden suscribirse, darle like y compartir este análisis para que más personas tengan acceso a una mirada crítica y sin filtros sobre la política estadounidense. Esto es Rumor de Estado. Donald Trump ha convertido la política en un espectáculo permanente. El problema, sin embargo, no es la teatralidad, es su incapacidad para sostenerla. Sus gestos calculados se desmoronan cuando los hechos o las imágenes revelan la descoordinación entre la forma y el fondo. En el caso de la muerte de Charlie Kirk, esta disonancia emerge con una claridad. No se trata únicamente de manipulación política, sino de la exposición de un liderazgo que prioriza la puesta en escena sobre la responsabilidad pública. Hoy, en Rumor de Estado, analizaremos cómo esa mezcla de performatividad y descuido erosiona la credibilidad de Trump y acelera la descomposición del proyecto político que él encabeza. Antes de comenzar, queremos hacerte un recordatorio rápido. Si te está gustando lo que estás viendo, no olvides suscribirte, darle like, comentar y compartir. El 98% de las personas no están suscritas. Dicho esto, pasamos a video. La intervención de Yasmine Crockett aporta un elemento esencial al debate. La experiencia directa del riesgo no es un argumento académico ni una situación calculada. Es la voz de alguien que convive con la amenaza. Su testimonio obliga a diferenciar entre discurso y consecuencia, cuando quienes ocupan cargos públicos reciben amenazas reales. El problema no es el intercambio de ideas, sino el caldo de cultivo que convierte la palabra en acción. Analizar esta pieza nos permite ver dos efectos simultáneos. Por un lado, la justificación instrumental de la violencia en varios sectores. Por otro, la complacencia institucional que deja a representantes
How are you holding up over the last 3.5 years? I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks. They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty. It'll be an absolutely magnificent structure. And I just see all the trucks. We just started, so it'll get done very nicely, and it'll be one of the best anywhere in the world, actually. Thank you so much.
El desvío del tema por parte de Trump a hablar de arquitectura en lugar de dolor es revelador por dos razones. Primero, muestra una emocionalidad performativa. La reacción pública no nace del reconocimiento del daño, sino de la necesidad de ocupar la escena mediática. Segundo, evidencia una priorización de la imagen y los proyectos personales por encima del deber cívico, cuando la respuesta institucional a una tragedia es la evasión o la promoción de intereses propios. La percepción pública no solo registra indiferencia, sino también una falla ética grave. Los líderes que anteponen su posicionamiento simbólico al duelo pierden autoridad moral para conducir discusiones serias sobre violencia y seguridad.
Very hurt when he saw this, but I mean everybody was. Oh, when I heard it, I was in the midst of, building a great. For 150 years, they've wanted a ballroom at the White House, right? They don't have a ballroom. They have to use tents on the lawn for President Xi when he comes over. If it rains, it's a wipeout. And so I was with the architects and with design. It's going to be incredible. And they came in. They said, Charlie Kirk is dead. I didn't know what they meant. I said, what do you mean dead? Charlie Kirk was shot. And they thought he was dead because it was so horrific, And I said, dead.
La sorpresa de los propios aliados mediáticos exponen a otro artista del fenómeno. La coartada del espectáculo se fractura incluso dentro del ecosistema que habitualmente protege al presidente. Esta grieta política, un presentador incomodado, una pausa en el relato, es un síntoma de la política. Cuando esto deja de encajar con el sentido común público, la maquinaria propagandística comienza a perder cohesión. Ese desgaste no solo afecta la percepción inmediata del incidente, mina la capacidad del movimiento para sostener argumentos más complejos o dañinos en el tiempo.
Yes, I got accepted to private school because my parents worked with me even when I got out of public school, because they had that luxury of being able to do that, and because both of my parents happened to be college educated and they could help me to do my work. But nevertheless, regardless of my education, because I've done both, I can actually be an advocate, and I understand the difference. And I do believe in the importance of having a sound public education. And maybe my mom would not have had to work so many jobs if there had not been people siphoning money out of our public schools to the extent that she felt like they were not going to be able to challenge me, her gifted child, as I was continuing to grow. So all we're saying is if you're going to give out $20-something thousand to $21,000 as it relates to these 1,400 students per child, then give out the same $21,000 for the students that are in public school. That's it. We're looking for equity. Something that y'all don't like. I know it's a bad word, but we're looking for equity. And I know that the gentle lady from North Carolina wants to brag about how many black and brown children. I will remind her one of the reasons the president has a problem with the city of D.C. right now is because it's black and brown. That's what it is. I mean, it would be odd if like the vast majority of the people that are taking advantage are not black and brown. That's the city. Okay.
La instrumentalización de una muerte para direccionar la conversación hacia otros asuntos, protección, retórica o intereses económicos y simbólicos es una estrategia conocida. Lo novedoso aquí es el costo estratégico. Al revelar desinterés o distracción en el liderazgo, esa estrategia pierde eficacia y provoca desconfianza entre los seguidores. En términos tácticos, la incapacidad de Trump para actuar correctamente, no saber sus líneas y cambiar de guión en el público provoca dos efectos simultáneos: erosionar la legitimidad del mensaje y acelerar la fragmentación interna del movimiento que debería unificar. La muerte de Charlie Kirk funciona, en este caso, como un espejo. Refleja la fragilidad de un proyecto político que depende tanto de la teatralidad como de la obediencia acrítica. Cuando el líder falla en la puesta en escena, la maquinaria se resquebraja y el relato pierde su fuerza movilizadora. Ese quiebre abre una ventana para reexaminar no solo lo público, sino las políticas y estructuras que permiten que la violencia sea reproducida o tolerada. Y yo les pregunto a ustedes, ¿consideran que la incapacidad performativa de Trump puede acelerar la descomposición del proyecto MAGA? ¿Cuáles serían las consecuencias políticas si la desconfianza se arraigara entre votantes fieles? No olvides suscribirte, darle like, compartir este video para sostener un periodismo crítico y riguroso sobre la política estadounidense. Esto es Rumor de Estado.